Welcome, everybody, to the CSIAC Digest Roundtable podcast, where we take the top articles from the latest CSIAC Digest, which you can subscribe to at www.csiac.org/CS where you can get a curated list of cybersecurity articles that are relevant to today's technology and cybersecurity world. And today we're going to be talking about the top articles that we thought were the most relevant and most important in today's industry. My name is Sean Bird.
My name is Cully Patch.
Kevin Joyce.
And the first article we're going to be jumping in today is titled Sea Hunter, a drone ship with no crew just joined the U.S. Navy's fleet. A drone ship called its actual name is Medium Displacement Unmanned Surface Vehicle, developed by DARPA, codenamed Sea Hunter. It was developed as part of the U.S. military strategy of replacing their standard model of much larger ships in a fleet with a lot of smaller ships, or pawns, as they say in the article. The vessel is 127 feet and can travel up to 27 knots, or around 31 miles per hour. And really, I think it's a kind of a ushering. It's not unpredictable that this would happen, and it's kind of ushering that new era of like unmanned drone warfare. The part that I think the article missed was the serious command and control issue that you would have. I mean, we have this problem with like predator drones and a lot of smaller drones. When you have a lot of them populating the airspace, you have a serious command and control issue with them talking to each other, and the automation versus manual remote control of these unmanned vehicles. So I think a really big, especially when you start putting weapons payloads on them, it's a really big issue.
Yep, absolutely. And of course, they've been working on autonomy and swarming for years, but as Mr. Work talked about, it actually will end up helping them in the long run, rather than having one huge ship that's hundreds of millions of dollars. They can actually have these smaller ships for $20 million a piece, and then swarm them to be able to be more effective. If one is taken out, it's not so much of an impact, not so much on money, but on the mission at the time.
Yeah.
And then the key part is that back to what you were saying, how do you coordinate them? There's been some algorithms, swarming algorithms, types of things that are going on with that too. But one of the big issues about autonomy, it was found in the Defense Science Board 2016 summer study on autonomy, was the idea of trust. At what point does the system take over? At what point does the human intervene? Then back to what you were saying, you were dealing with probably a comms starved environment. Could be either by lack of comms or being interfered by the adversary. And how do you actually be able to make sure that we're still receiving situational awareness while actually being able to do the command and control?
The fidelity of the communications. I'm assuming they're using like a satellite kind of network, or they could do like a blimp sort of mesh network that's kind of popular with like wireless communications now. But at a very basic level, I'm assuming this is worth it just for covering the amount of sea that you have to cover. Picture just a net of drone ships covering the sea. I mean, Kevin, you've had experience.
Yes, as a former sonar technician, from an anti-submarine warfare perspective, it's a great addition to be able to spread out your assets. Additionally, there are areas of the sea that you just can't see from your ship. So it would be a lot easier to have a drone to go out and search a particular area. And the one question I have is how the classifications are going to be done. Are they going to be done remotely? Are they going to try to be automated within these drones? That's the very first thing. You're listening to the sound, you're hearing things, the computers are chewing on it, but you need to be able to classify. Is this a whale? Is this a friendly? Is this a...
Yeah, I wonder how much of these ships is going to be pure automation versus like automate to assist.
Correct.
Like with a predator drone, you have one guy in a control room, a lot of video consoles all over the place controlling these drones and calling all the shots and getting all that information. And then there's an autopilot sort of mode, but with these drone ships, I don't know. Where do they draw the line? I know in the article they mentioned the weapon systems will be purely human controlled. They won't let any automation of weapons take place.
But that's the very tricky part of, anti-submarine warfare is being able to classify. And a lot of it is listening and using experience to be able to hear what, the screw rate and be able to classify. The other thing that would really help is these things are a lot smaller than a 400-foot ship.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have a lot smaller sound print. So it's going to be harder to detect from under the ocean. And also, if they did detect it, it's going to throw off your enemy's weapon systems.
So how many, just, I don't know, you may not know this off the top of your head, but how many ships are in one fleet? I mean, you have your carrier. And
you have your carrier,
and
and then you have your destroyers, you have your cruisers,
mm-hmm.
and your frigates.
Mm-hmm.
Now your frigates are out for your anti-submarine warfare. Your cruisers, destroyers usually have your cruisers are an anti-air, and your destroyers and some of your frigates are dual anti-air, anti-submarine. Then you have your submarines.
Yeah. So I'm assuming these would be in addition to a normal fleet.
Correct.
As an outside perimeter sort of thing.
Well, I mean, typically I would think the application would be in an area where that you need to do anti-submarine warfare. Mm-hmm. So you would send out a ship with a number of drones to canvass an area. Or if you have a known hostile enemy, you want to be able to detect that in that area. Mm-hmm. So you would send the drones out and canvass an entire area.
Search and rescue attempts probably become a lot easier with that, I would imagine, as well, with a lot more ships that
it
are
could
capable.
Be if they have active sonar and they're able to ping and detect.
Yeah, they're never going to put out what exact systems are on these ships. Correct. But yeah, I wonder if they have sonar and what kind of systems.
They would have to, otherwise they wouldn't be able to detect anything.
Oh yeah, true.
Right. And another point of the autonomy summer study was human agent partnering, mm-hmm. and that's going to be huge. It's already a lot of work being done there. And just like you were saying, at what part is going to be done by the humans, what part is going to be done by the computers. And the idea is that overall is to try to take some of this mundane stuff that can easily be classified and defined by computers to advise the human, and then the human can ultimately make a decision. Because you brought in a good point about the ultimate part of when you bring in lethal weapons, the human actually has to be ultimately in charge by regulation.
Yeah.
But there's going to be other things like what we call them kind of black box algorithms that the thing came up with something, you don't have time to figure out what it took into account and why, but you may have to trust it and make a decision based on that, or whether to override or not. This HAL problem, the 2001 Space Odyssey. When all of a sudden HAL says, "I'm sorry, I can't do that," and what do you do with that? Because it's maybe violating some ROE or law of armed conflict, and it's been hard set to say no, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And so there's these human machine things are going to have to be worked out. All the situational awareness to communications but overall this is probably going to be a good thing.
So moving on here, the next article we have, very popular article I think picked up by the mainstream media, was the U.S. military is reviewing its rules after fitness trackers expose sensitive data. So in summary, the DoD is reviewing and revising its current policies on fitness app usage as well as other smartphone applications. Specifically apps that track user movements and store and share those movements publicly. These features are meant to allow users to share jogging and running routes and times in order to build communities around that activity. Some apps go so far as to pair this information up with specific user data, such as Strava, which is the one that they were, or Strava, however you say it, which is the one that they were mentioning. These features pose serious security risks to the DoD and the military abroad. So I think this is why it was picked up by mainstream media, because obviously this is just a generic problem, but it just means more to the DoD, is that these fitness apps, they can track your movement and they kind of track the jogging route that you run. They're making that community in a social media kind of aspect where you're sharing these sort of things, where you can see I saw my friend Jim running this route in 27 minutes, and I'm going to try to beat him on that time at running this same route. But what if Jim is a colonel that works at the Pentagon? And from being in D.C., I know that a lot of people run around these areas, and they make these specific routes, like these people going out at lunch and running routes around specific, government installations as well as abroad. And it just so happens that, lo and behold, the military is one of the most physically active communities out there because they have to be.
Well, I think of it more as a parent. I've got a daughter away at college, and I have this talk with her about anything you put on social media. Anytime you check in, somebody knows where you are. Now, these apps will actually show your whole route, and if you keep running the same route, it allows somebody, if it's not, classified correctly or not restricted, anybody can see where you're going and what time you're there, especially if you're in a routine.
Yeah.
So I think it really comes down to the developers of the apps. We need to make sure that they're putting out warnings so people understand when you're doing this, who can see it.
Yeah.
And making sure people understand in their social media apps, you've got to restrict the number of people who can see your data.
Yep, that's a very good point. I think that always having a conscious understanding of what you're putting out there is going to be very important. But sometimes I can think of this also as inevitable. We're rapidly moving towards a massive, if you want to call it in terms of data that's out there that allows us to be tracked just about anywhere.
Yeah.
And so we may have to come to some point. There's been authors that talked about, it's about the equivalent of trying to hold water and as it's slipping through your fingers. And so we may have to take a look at it from the other perspective, and which is the Pentagon is now, of what is the real effects. Ultimately, from an adversary standpoint, if they're a true adversary, they probably know folks that are already there, that in general. Even though the part about associating names is pretty disturbing. But what if we just kind of thought of it from a standpoint of, okay, they know everything, and how does that affect my operations? What do I do now? And because ultimately, I don't think this is going to go down much in terms of it's going to be more and more data there.
Yeah, we're going to see more of this out there and more public information rather than privatization of it. Yeah.
Right. And the big thing about this is that we can't stuff our proverbial data in the mattress like they did back in the day with the banks, because they couldn't trust the banks. At some point, we're going to have to embrace actually putting our data out there and getting the same advantages of that than the adversary and others. This is the Air Force has actually done this through their folks have closed Facebook groups.
Yeah.
And yes, there's a bit of a risk involved, but at the same time, the benefits are super powerful in terms of sharing information, sharing leadership information within peer-to-peer, upcoming assignments, advice. And so it is a true problem, and every time you're going to see more and more of these, but we may have to start looking at it from that other standpoint.
A huge issue. So let's move on here, just because we're running out of time. One, because I definitely want to hit these last two because I think they're really important for cybersecurity. The next article being how to steal $500 million in cryptocurrency. One of the largest heists in history, regardless of it being in the tech field or not. Hackers broke into the cryptocurrency exchange called Coincheck Inc., stealing $500 million in cryptocurrency, the NEM currency. The hackers gained access through externally connected crypto wallets, and the NEM Foundation has made the cashing in of this cryptocurrency very difficult, but not impossible for the hackers. The NEM apparently cannot roll back the crypto chain or the blockchain in order to negate the stolen funds, as Ethereum did in 2015. Now, obviously, this being one of the biggest monetary heists in history, it's a big deal. It happening so early on in cryptocurrency's stage is probably really bad for businesses' trust in cryptocurrency. A business isn't going to put its funds into cryptocurrency and invest in it when things are so fragile in terms of security. And they hooked up their wallet. So these were stored in not soft wallets, hot wallets, where they're connected to external networks instead of cold wallets, which are hard, like a USB device that is your cryptocurrency wallet that is not, people can't access outside of you plugging it into a computer. So this is really important, I think, for the future of cryptocurrency and people's trust in it. And it was kind of interesting to see how they couldn't roll back the blockchain like they did with Ethereum when Ethereum got hacked in 2015. So there must be some, I don't know exactly, but there must be some issues there with them rolling that back.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this comes back to the whole story of why did you rob the bank? Because that's where the money is, and this is the new bank, and it comes with great benefits of not actually having to put yourself in a physical vulnerability, which was some of the big. It's all about how do you de-incentivize this type of behavior, right? And so right now because we're in the leading edge of the technology, the laws haven't caught up, the social norms haven't caught up. We're still the hacker has the advantage, and these things have just gone up. There's lots of stories about of money just disappearing, and beyond the Bitcoin, but regular money actually disappearing because they could get away with it. And if it goes to another country, basically you're done. Yeah, you're done. So I mean, this is key. The blockchain technology, which is underneath this, is one of our big things that we're watching. And the neat thing about this was that they weren't totally lost. They were able to actually go back and try to chase the money, if you will, and actually add to the chain. They were considering forking it. They were putting flags on the actual chains so that if they try to spend the money, then they wouldn't be able to trade it. Able to. Yeah. So that's due to the blockchain technology underneath. So so it's a new game a little bit. Same game we've been playing all the time with the money, but it's a little different tech game, and eventually I think they'll dial it in.
Well, I think going off what Sean said too, I think when you look at the industry, until investors have more confidence that it's secure, the technology is only going to go so far.
Absolutely.
They need to have that, feeling that whatever money is put in there, they're going to be able to keep safe. According to Talos Intelligence, a lot of these, cryptocurrency type thefts are now coming out of ransomware attacks. Now, the attackers are using the same technology as they were in ransomware, but instead of holding that device hostage, they're installing malware, which can act as a botnet. Now, it's the similar idea where the machine gets infected, and these Internet of Things devices that really don't have a lot of computing power, but these ransomware and basically a botnet for
mining,
pool-based mining.
Yeah, pool-based mining. Yeah.
A lot of these small devices that don't have a lot of computing power are used to work together, similar to a botnet, and be able to go out and mine for cryptocurrency.
Yeah, this is the other way that they're kind of like skimming off the top of the crypto market. So we talked about this in a previous episode of the podcast where there was a WordPress. The hackers were exploiting old WordPress plugins in order to install Monero miners, Monero being a cryptocurrency. Right. Yeah. And so this is like the next evolution of that, is where they're just getting into making botnets of these things and doing that whole collective computer resource pooling in order to mine these cryptocurrencies.
Right. They literally swarm too as well, because you just how these bots, and if you can control them properly, you've got more power than you had one individual.
Yeah. You mentioned Monero. It's one of the most popular mining targets. They saw a 300,000% increase in the last 12 months.
Yeah. Because it was easier to mine, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They needed the right amount because when you have, say, Bitcoin, you're not going to be able to really do a botnet for that because there's so much competition already. The market's flooded for cryptocurrency miners in mining services. So you got to pick one that has enough value in the currency itself, but not enough users and miners in the market so you can compete with those resources, because it's whoever calculates the next block in the blockchain first.
Right. It comes down to, too, a lot of things. A lot of machines are getting infected the same old way. Spam with malicious attachments.
Yeah.
It's critical that organizations have a spam filter, either hardware or software. A lot of these things can be detected, but the other part of it is you still need to train your users.
Yeah.
Do not open attachments, even if it's from somebody if you're not expecting it. And that's an ongoing problem for all of us to make sure our users are aware, and they help the rest of the organization by not opening these malicious payloads.
Absolutely. Phishing is the number one way they're getting in, and it's so we talk about the OSI model of layer 7, but layer 8, the human part. And it's social engineering, plain and simple. And Kevin Mitnick was a master in this. He was technically astute, but his major part was the social engineering part that made it happen. And if you've got something that basically can't be broken in terms of encryption, but if you can convince them to give you the key, that's there you
You're
go.
already in.
Or click on an email. So it's a very big issue in education and culture.
So just to mention the last article here, because we're running over time, is the Autosploit marries Shodan, Metasploit, and Metasploit. It puts IoT devices at risk. Autosploit is a new tool that combines Shodan and Metasploit, Shodan being a search engine for the Internet of Things to discover details about services such as IPs and server software information, and Metasploit is a framework designed to help penetrate networks and applications via scripting and automation. And I'll put those definitions down at the bottom. And Metasploit has like some pre-canned hacks and stuff like that. But Autosploit is a Python scripting job that a user on GitHub created and released to the open internet that kind of just marries the two. So it'll scan a service and run Metasploit modules that automatically will exploit those services based on what it finds on Shodan. And obviously this is not as big of an issue as people would think straight off, but obviously this is a new step in the script kiddie sort of thing where people can, it's a low barrier for entry where people can just get in and say, point at this service and go. And it just scans and tries to exploit over and over and over until it gets in.
Right.
Yep.
And it's a scary combination. Script kiddie's been running automated script for years. They're not developing the exploit techniques, but especially with the Internet of Things, we need to make sure that we're educating users on techniques to secure their devices. The commercial industry, you've got to be first to market. You've got to get it out there. You've got to sell volumes to make your money. But a lot of times security is an afterthought, and it's not till it's out there. And now you're selling IoT device to your grandmother who plugs it in and she can order her cat food, without having to sit at the computer. Now, a lot of these commercial uses, they aren't thinking of security. And the end user is not astute enough to be able to secure the devices on their own. Hopefully they have somebody come in and help them, but these are the things that have to be out of the box. The security has to be there. And before you set it up, when you go through your initial setup script, that's where you need to let the user know that they need to set up their security or have it built in. That's the biggest thing, is have the companies be responsible to have security built into these devices when they're deployed.
Yep. Yeah, it's always been security, whether it be electronic or physical, has always been the balance between security and convenience, or in DoD terms, operations, being able to do your job. And security needs to be there, but it can also hinder operations. It can also hinder customers being able to use their products. And so if the customer is dissatisfied and they don't buy them, then that's a real issue. And so how do we get the best of both worlds and actually put the security that needs in there, but also keep it convenient to the customer so it's still valuable, adds value to they continue to want to buy the products. This is a big thing in terms of mass scaling. Obviously, still folks that have the astute enough knowledge to be able to hack, especially at a high level, are still relatively low density, high demand. And if you've been able to script down a lot of these things and can bring the masses in of folks that know enough to be able to make a difference, this is a lot like we were talking about earlier with the swarming of either bots or ships or in a smaller level. In that one person with this device might not be able to get in, but if they got 100 of them working on it at once, eventually there's probably going to be able to have some effect there.
It lowers the bar for what a hacker is, or even a power user is.
Right.
I mean, if you're familiar enough to run up the program, you can start hacking.
Yep. And that's key, because if you got a lot of people but not so many of the actual good hackers, you may be able to still make effects with the masses of people and these tools.
And it comes down to, you look at your house, your DVR's on the internet, your Alexa's on the internet, your Blu-ray player, everything is connected. And if you don't have your wireless router secured, anybody sitting out in the parking lot or sitting out on the street can get into your network and access all your devices. So that's another thing. We need to make sure that these devices, when they're coming home, they have clear instructions on how to secure them, or the scripts that set up the devices, they need to have the security built in so it's easier for the end user. So they don't have to think about it. It automatically applies the security.
I think this is
for them.
also why we're seeing a big push for like force pushed updates from services. Like Microsoft is the biggest that's enabled. You'll see your computer update even though you didn't give it explicit permission to update. They're going to push that update because it's a security risk, and it's a really big deal. Like, so I think they did that with the Meltdown Inspector patches, and with this new. There's another Meltdown patch that they did to cover up their mistaken patch earlier, but it's you're going to see, I think, a little bit more of that, especially with all these devices, like all your Internet of Things, like your Alexa and all that stuff. It's got to do this update because the services that it's connected to are really vulnerable, and you have risks like this out there. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and if you would like to receive and subscribe the CS Digest, please visit www.csiac.org/CS Digest, and you'll receive the list of articles that we talked about today and more every 2 weeks. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Did you know that CSIAC offers free monthly webinars featuring experts in the areas of cybersecurity, software engineering, modeling and simulation, and knowledge management? Come see leading industry professionals talk about industry practices and leading research. Make sure to visit www.csiac.org/webinars in order to subscribe to our mailing list and see when the next webinar series is available. There you can also watch previous webinar series to catch up. Visit www.csiac.org/webinars.